All right. So we're going to go over this course is or module is going to be a couple different things. So we're going to go over first the camera, and then we're going to go over foundational knowledge. So this, I think, if you're anything like me, this is going to be the one where all of a sudden it's going to click and it's going to go, man, I feel like I can really do this thing now. Because there's a lot of times in church that we run into some issues. I want to say, well, we ran into the big issue and the lights flickered and then they went off. And then I want to say the very next service, the cameras were still set for that type of environment, but yet the lights were there. And then the question is, hey, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? And so I will tell you, Ethan, Brother Garrett, and myself, until y'all feel comfortable when you say, hey, I know exactly what I'm doing, or you're not getting feedback from, say, one of the switcher operators, because you might think you know what you're doing, but the switcher operator is looking at it across the board. He's got all three screens or four if we're running the roamer, and he's like, no, we're not right here. But if you have any issues, again, Brother Garrett, if he's running around here, very good with photography. I think we all know that. I mean, if you're on Instagram at all, you see his work. It's great. Most people don't realize Ethan is very proficient in videography, especially. He does photography as well. Him and I, when we get a chance, like to run downtown. I prefer street photography, so I like running around downtown. Put the big lens on where people can't see. You're a little bit further. Just capture everybody. Just the sense of urban street. So we like to run down there, and if you ever get a chance, if that's the kind of stuff you like to do, is operate these cameras, get a camera and run downtown, or especially in a situation maybe when it's dark outside and you want to learn how to really use your settings. It's just fun. Just get out there and really work that out. And you're not doing a wedding, so people aren't relying on your talents. You're just doing it for yourself, and as you grow and get better, it really works when you start to move into here. So, again, I may in this one, refer back to Garrett or Ethan as far as if they have any thoughts on anything that we're talking about. But that's the reason being, and that's why Garrett and Ethan and myself are on this team, is to really kind of help with that more technical side, so that we can grow together. So let's talk about this. Is the Blackmagic Design Studio Camera 4K Pro G2. That's the full name. We call it our live stream cameras. That's what we're going to call it. But that's the name of it, the 4K Pro G2. It is a professional grade camera. So, I was talking earlier and just saying, hey, most of the time at a church, especially if you're on a tech team, you're fighting with the church 24/7 to try to get the next best, the next greatest. They're still got iPhones from, but you're trying to get the next best and you're trying to explain it. We don't have that problem in this church. All three of us have played with some really nice cameras, and yet when we come to church, we're ready to kill it on these Blackmagics. That's a rare, and it really is a testament. Honestly, I have to give a lot of credit to Pastor on that, because he has a mind for the pursuit of excellence, and even I would consider him even a creative at that. So when you have that, and you have somebody that's got that same passion and the ability to look into, sometimes it's a double-edged sword, because he's going to critique some stuff, because he does have that creative side to his ministry. He's going to be able to say, hey, look, but I'll be honest with you, and this is just a testament to y'all, because he's been on the Roamer one time. So it's not, oh, well, we came on the team and things are, no, this team as a whole, in the past, since moving into this sanctuary, has got a slew of positive feedback from everywhere, whether it be online or Pastor coming to us because he watches different things, especially when we ran the Roamer for the first time. Pastor's going to go home and watch it, so we know that he's looking. And I asked him particularly. I said, hey, if you have any constructive feedback or anything that you want to throw at us, we're wide open. He had nothing for me at the time. So that's, obviously we know we're not perfect, but that's a good thing. Like, that's a testament on all of us and all of y'all. I say all of us. Really, it is us as a team, but I mean, I'm really putting that on y'all. I mean, that's an amazing thing, especially coming in with brand new black walls and lighting, and the way that we stepped into this sanctuary. I honestly thought we were going to have to come into this class today and it was going to be a fresh start with everybody. But some of this stuff I'm getting ready to talk about, we've already had these conversations. So I'm just going to ask that you bear with me on some of this stuff that we've already talked about, and just know that it's for camera purpose, video purposes, as well as other people, that didn't have this conversation. So let's go over the buttons and the functionality of this camera. So just remember, it is a professional grade camera that also has user-friendly controls. That's why it's widely used in churches, around the globe, because you could get into some real heavy cinematography cameras. Operating those things are just something else. So let's talk about this side first over here. Does anybody know what the PGM button does? This is a cool button. It doesn't work yet. It doesn't work at our church yet. But the reason why we haven't installed those SDI cables yet is because we're probably going to have to leave the HDMI and go back to SDI, which means the cameras are going to be on 5, 6, and 7 again. So we're going to have to reroute this whole thing. So we got to really think through that process. But whenever we run an SDI, not just from the camera to the ATM switcher, but when we run it back, you all are going to be able to tap that program button, and when you hold it down, that screen goes blank. It won't go blank. If you're on the switcher, you understand that the program screen is the live screen. So how have you ever been like, hey, yes, ma'am? SDI is a form of cable. So if you know, there's an HDMI cable, an SDI cable is probably more along the lines of like a coaxial type cable. Maybe you could think of it more along the terms of internet cable / the cable for your TV, like that coaxial type. It transfers data probably, say, faster and more efficiently, so you can send more back and forth than, say, HDMI. If we tried to shoot it from there all the way to that spot, you'd probably have to have a booster and everything else. So with that being the case, they don't really communicate well HDMI. The video looks good, but if you really want all the features, the tally lights to work, which means when I'm live, this light turns, I think it's red. When you're not live, I think it turns, when you're on the preview side, if you're on the switcher, you'll see there's a preview side and there's a program side. If it's program, that's what the world is seeing. If it's switcher, or if it's preview, that just means that's what we want to go to next. If I hit cut or program or cut or auto on there, it's going to shoot to that preview. So if I'm on this, I want to be able to see, okay, my light's red. I'm live. Better not go crazy with the camera. If my light is white, I'm in the ready. That means I'm listening for the switcher to tell me, hey, I need this, I need that, or I'm coming to you, or whatever. This program right here, if I get lost and say, hey, am I live, or what shot are we getting right now? Because I'll tell you what happened on Wednesday night. It was fine, because we worked with it. But we had 3 cameras on the piano. We did. I really couldn't switch because I was like, where are we going to switch to the piano? Where are we going to go? But luckily, I forget if it was Darren on 3 or whatever. Anyways, one of them moved over and switched to something else. So we got to it. So I probably had a longer scene on piano than we were intended to have. But if Darren was able to hit this button right here, he'd go, oh, they're already on piano. So he'd switch over and get something else. What's on program? What's live? Yes, sir. Yep. And the other thing is they should be able to hear the audio in their headset. So when they hit that, the audio from program will also come through, so they'll know where we're at with the audio. It is awesome. That's another reason why we got to get this SDIs run properly. So that's your program button. Then you have your F1, F2, F3 buttons. These are available function keys. Now, I have set them, but that's not where they have to stay. Here's my thought process, and I might be wrong on this one, but this is my thought process. Now, I know you've got some availability issues with work here and there, but you're killer on 1, you're killer on 3. As far as I'm concerned, you're team lead for 1, you're team lead for 3. My thing is this. If people got questions, if I say, okay, Sister Callie is going to be on camera 3's team, she's on your team. And you're going to be communicating with her, whether it's on the clock or off the clock, however you communicate. It's like, hey, this is how we need to run these, which we're going to go over that stuff, but hey, this is how we need to set up our shots. This is the buttons. This is whatever. So as far as I'm concerned, eventually function 1, 2, and 3 are yours. Function 1, 2, or 3 are yours. I have them set up to, number 1, function 1 is zooms in for focus zoom. That did not change anything on the switcher. You did not zoom in at all. What you did was you zoomed in, so I can now look at him, and I can focus this camera more effectively on his face, okay? Function 2 is an autofocus. We'll use it. It worked. It's slow. These cameras are not set for autofocusing. Like, it shouldn't be really what we rely on. If anybody ever leaves here and says, I love this and I want to go into the cinematography field, you're never going to autofocus. None of those cameras have autofocus. We should not be autofocusing in church either. It helps for people like me who are supposed to wear glasses, but I don't have mine on today. I shouldn't even be running this camera without my glasses on. But it helps for people like me. But there's also another cool feature on the camera that will help people like me that don't wear their glasses like they're supposed to. But that's autofocus. We have that for now. It's open for y'all to change out. F3 is our white balance. So whenever I click this white balance, if I set white balance at Kelvin of 3550, but the lights just went off in the church, now we got to switch all of our numbers up. I should effectively, the next service, be able to hit that button and switch back to what we generally use. Yes, ma'am. That's gonna be our foundational knowledge. So I'm running over our buttons, and then the very next, after these buttons, I'm gonna talk to you about all of these features and what that does, because that's a good question. So anyways, that button right there, I didn't say anyways in a bad way, but that button right there will switch back to whatever you set that function at. So if it's 3550, it'll go back to 3550. When you hit that button again, if your white balance was set at 8,000 kelvins, it'll go back to the 8,000, whatever your last one was. Again, those are buttons that I feel like as team leads on your respective camera, you can go in the system and say, okay, well, this is how I want it set up. And then you'll teach your team, these are the buttons that we use. On-screen buttons, that's these up here. So this is a touch screen. So the first one's going to be the frames per second. All of the cameras have to be set to the same frames per second or else, and that system the switcher has to say, okay, we're reading this at blank. Now, we use a 29.97. That's cinema grade. So we'll talk again what frames per second is in a minute. I don't want to get lost in that stuff yet. That's cinema grade. We're using 29.97. On the switcher, it is 29.97. But on the roaming camera, it's 30 frames per second. That camera, that system right there will not feed 29.97. It will feed, but for some reason, 30 frames per second is so close, it still comes in on our, but if I set that camera to 50 right now, it'll completely cut off on our switcher. So we have to make sure that all of these, except for this one, which that's Garrett's team. Garrett is over the roaming team. That camera right there will be set at 30. Ours are 29.97. Unless anything changes in the future. We can't go down any further. I like 24. We can't go to 24 because our monitor won't read 24 frames per second. The whole monitor shuts off. So 29.97. Shouldn't have to touch that. Your shutter, that's the next one. So this is technically like your aperture settings. This shutter, well, not really your aperture. That's not really the correct terminology. Let's just do this. I'm trying to stay very high level on this one. So we keep this one generally between 160, 1/60 is what you're going to see, and 120. I'll tell you what that means here in a little bit, but basically, those are the numbers that we operate with. We will adjust those in certain scenarios, so you know when the lights went off and stuff, we had to adjust things because it does touch on lighting. And it does also touch on motion blur, but let's keep that for later on. Your next one is going to be your iris. Generally, well, you just saw what happened when I moved that back. The larger we make the aperture, the more light. So if I bring it this way, okay, the larger the number doesn't mean the larger the aperture. The larger the number, the smaller. We understand how that is with like aughts and everything else. Okay, so we pull it back here. Now, we're working off of 4.8 right now. Now, what's perfect? For us, we like that 2.8. That's what's on, if I'm not mistaken, on that camera there. And that's what's on, well, we've got generally on the 2. But I bought some lenses. We just need better tripods. The lenses we got is very super heavy for those, and they just bounce like crazy. So once we get that done, we'll have 2.8, so we'll have more lighting, which of course we need more light for inside of a room like this. The gain is going to be next. In the photography world, that gain is called ISO, I-S-O. In our world, it's called gain. We generally run that gain, I would say, between 4 and 8. If we're rising above 8, again, we're going to talk about later what we can do, but we need to work some stuff out. Because the issue is when you add more gain, you introduce the risk of noise. So if I was to pull this gain all the way up, that's noise. That's not just light. That's noise. That's literal dots on the screen, white dots. So we introduce the noise to our. So if we talk about what's your gain, that's what we're asking for. So you got -6, 0, 10, or you can go the in-between numbers from here. 10 is too high for us. We generally don't run at 10. We have, but we shouldn't. White balance measures in Kelvin. That's going to be this number down here. So as you see, when I pull this down, back and forth, that changes your Kelvin. And then your tent is going to be this number over here on the side. So that tent right there says 8 right now. I can change that quickly. So you got your tent number over here, your white balance. That comes from this button. When I tap that, that comes up. I can hit auto white balance and update. We notice it changed. Now, that'll give you a base setting, but if you look at that, you know that's just not a good view. So again, we're not going to focus on auto. We're not going to put our shutter on auto. We're not going to put our iris on auto. We're going to learn today what those numbers mean and how we can operate this camera effectively. And if your production manager / switcher operator says to you, "Hey, I need you to adjust these numbers," we're going to say okay, because they see multiple screens at one time and they're trying to get you to a certain level. The other one is your settings button. We're not going to go over settings in here today because most of this stuff nobody will be touching, but I will show you this. If you go into your setup and you go over, I think it's to 3. Yes. You go over to 1, 2, 3, 4. Screen number 4. You'll see it says F1, F2, and F3. That's where you're going to set basically what your F1 buttons are. F1 is focus zoom. You can just scroll through this and change it to whatever. Or if you're going to do gain or white balance or whatever, that'll pop up, and you'll just tap this and set a specific number. But that's where you're going to go. You're going to go into settings, then setup, and the fourth screen over, you'll see F1. You can switch it to F2 to change F2 and F3. That's how you change those. So that's the buttons that you'll generally be working with. Over here on the side, we have a brightness. This right here is strictly for your screen. This doesn't affect anybody back there. So if you don't like, but I will tell you this, I generally run them at that center balance just because, if I turn my brightness up on my screen, but my numbers are wrong, so it's too dark in here while we're recording, they know, but I don't know. How am I going to set it accordingly? So I understand, between contrast, which is this one, and brightness, which is here, you want to set it to what's comfortable. But I'll just tell you this. If Brother Teddy says, change this number, this number, this number, you change it, it looks perfect for him, then at that point you can adjust your contrast and your brightness so that it looks good for you. And then you'll know in the future, this is how I run my contrast and brightness, and this is how it looked good the last time, so I can base it off of that. This button is called peaking. So if you notice, when I did that, everything got, which I have this camera set to white. We can change it back to red or whatever color. Certain people like myself are colorblind, so red is one of the colors I can't see. So if I operate a camera, I never operate with red because it doesn't show up for me like that. So if y'all noticed during pre-service, I called Kaylee over to help me out with getting the colors of the camera properly. It's not the brightness, it's the colors. Because if you ever see me, I edit photography, and I love to do it, but you'll be like, yo, that dude is a little orange. Or I thought he had a suntan. No, in y'all's eyes, he's orange. But red, green, and yellow, I'm colorblind. So I have issues with those. And you're going to know why in a second when we start talking about these numbers, why I have this issue. So this peaking stays on white for me. I can see it perfectly fine. So if I was to focus on, let's come back with this camera. And you're going to notice when I get to this door, the door handle just turned really white. Can y'all see that? Now it's not. If I turn my peaking all the way up, well, it's going to get very fuzzy, but everything that's even remotely in focus starts to come into white. I like to bring mine back maybe halfway. You can bring it back, very minute, because now I know if it's very minute and that door handle is super white, that means that door handle is crispy, like she's in focus. So, again, that's why your manual focus here is where you're going to live. We don't hit the autofocus. We live on that focus. We don't run the focus fast like this. Like, your focus shouldn't be that much. So, just little, if you can see my finger right here, just little movements like this right here are going to bring you in and out of focus, which is kind of cool, because if you're working a crowd and people's got their hands raised like this and you're looking over the shoulder of that crowd and you go, okay, that's the pastor, so he's in white. I see him in white, but now let's go to the crowd, and now it's going to be blurry back there. Who's going to be white? The hands. The hands are going to have that white outline. But I want to do it smoothly, because I can go between pastor and the crowd just that quickly. Just a very minute. We're not going to take it and wrench because that doesn't work. It's and plus you're going to start to get that roller coaster effect. Right now it was just that fast. Now we're focused over here on these. So that's how you can put your peaking all the way up. I wouldn't suggest that. You can bring it to the middle, or you can bring it back just slightly, so that you just slightly change your color. If you don't see red properly, change it to white. They have yellow and what? Is it just red, yellow, and white? Yeah. So you'll go into settings, and I think it's in setup. I'll see one that says white. Yeah, it's in here. It's in, it might be underneath monitor. I don't know. I'll find it and I'll let you know, because it's on here. It's on here somewhere. It just says white, and then you can change out that color to whatever color you want. But yeah, I'll get lost on here right now if I go that route. But yeah, so you can change it to whatever color. That can be done. That's again. So real quick, why do we come to church at practice time? To practice. So here's the last thing that we need to be doing. Gathered together, because here's what I'm not doing. I'm not asking everybody to come to church for practice so I can waste your time. Just like this morning, I want to work from 9 to 12 so that we don't have to be here from 9 to 3, because all of y'all's time is valuable. My time is valuable. It just doesn't do us any benefit to just say, hey, y'all come waste your time. Because I know how it feels to me when I'm out to eat with my family. We got 15 people out to eat. It took us an hour and a half just to get seated and ate. And now I look at my clock and I'm like, man, I got to go to music practice. I don't even get to go home. Like, that's not what I'm trying to do to everybody. The reason why we're here is because they're practicing, the sound is practicing, and we're practicing. So what that means is if we can get the music team, that's not my department, but I'm just saying, if I make enough suggestions and we can get the music team to stand in their respective places during practice and to focus as if we were presenting this song to the crowd, then I can get camera 1 and camera 3 on their cameras, and they can get full effect. Okay, so Brother Josh is singing this verse, and the production manager is saying, hey, 3, because he's on his camera right now. Hey, 3, Josh is singing right now. What if we did, and we're going to have some call-offs here in just a minute, but what if we did a cowboy on him? So then y'all are going to be communicating back and forth. So, yeah, it's going to be tough for you probably during service, because you're not going to remember everything, but he's going to have been taking notes. So when he says, hey, we're coming up on verse 2, remember cowboy on Josh? Camera 3, you're going to remember, oh, yeah, we already went through this. So, again, it's all about excellence. There's no way we can show up to church, and this happens. This happens. We show up to church, we show up to church 5 minutes before it even starts. Then we walk in, we walk over here, and we're just talking. We're shaking hands, talking to people. And then 2 minutes before it starts, we walk over to our camera. Your numbers aren't set properly. Well, they are now. Why? Because one of us has probably got here and set them up already. Or one of y'all two that are generally here have already walked over there and set them up. Like, that's not the way it's supposed to be. Like, we're not gonna punish the ones that are here at practice. At the end of the day, you're probably not gonna see yourself scheduled for the next time. You know, you didn't get fired. We just didn't have a spot on the schedule for you. It's just that simple. Now, but yeah, let's just be mindful that like, yeah, if we get through this and they've already practiced all 3 songs and they're just going back over them and we're done, I'm not saying your guys ain't allowed to talk. My point I'm getting at is if we're operating service and it feels like the first time that we've seen all this and we don't know what's going. I love the fact that Trey's doing the papers now. That's kind of cool. He's got the papers and maybe he always has, but I'm just seeing him for the first time. It's like, oh, well, this person, that person. So that part's taken. Anyways, that was just free. Took up a little more time than I wanted, but that was free. Make sure we're here. The switcher's probably going to be here first. That's why certain people run the switcher. It is a committed position. I'm sorry, a consistent position. It's a consistent position. Brother Freddie and Brother Teddy have been doing it for a long time. I don't have any, like, not that I say that I go home and think about this. I'm just saying I don't have any, I don't think to myself when I'm scheduling, oh man, who am I going to put on this service because it's Father's Day? It's Freddie or Teddy. Like, they've been doing this long enough, and I've been with them on their team. And honestly, the fact that without any meeting or conversation, I've come into this team and they're just like, hey, no, cool, you go. I've switched up with, like, Brother Ted and ran switcher when he was scheduled, and he was like, yo, I'll just sit here and see what you do, like when we did the Romer for the first time. That right there tells me that we're on the same team. We're on the same team. Those are the people that are on switcher. So generally, you're not going to just come into the team. So we got some people who signed up to be here today. They may have missed it, but they're going to get this video. You're probably not going to come into the team and just rock the switcher. Like, that's the production manager. That means you've probably ran that camera, you've probably ran that camera, you've probably run the back camera, you understand the shots, you understand what we're looking for, and you can communicate that effectively to the team. Because if I get Brother such and such on that camera and it's his second Sunday, how's the switcher going to address his issues and say, hey? So those are the committed ones. More than likely, all the switchers are sitting in this room right now. If we add any switchers, they're probably here. So let's move forward. The forward moving is the foundational knowledge. This is the questions that you were asking. This is the stuff. Now we talked about the buttons. Maybe I should have done the buttons after, but now we're going to talk about the buttons. So the first thing we're going to talk about is ISO. So ISO, it is an international organization for standardization. I didn't know that. Didn't know that's what it meant. I actually found that out. All I know is ISO. So what it represents for any camera enthusiast or anybody that's doing this is basically the camera's sensitivity to light. So if you think of your ISO knob, think of it kind of like a volume knob. So, you know, if you need to make the volume louder, you just turn the volume knob up. If you need to increase light, then you turn your ISO up. The ISO is the volume. That can be a problem. Where's the ISO on this camera? Does anybody know? No? Yes. Yes. So if you remember, I said in the photography world, so Kaylee's listening, for her world, it's ISO. In the video world, and as long as you're not using a DSLR for your videos, in the video world, it's the gain, okay? So what we refer to as ISO, just convert that. So Brother Garrett would be like, hey, yeah, the ISO's this and that. Just remember, we're talking, he's used to shooting on his Canon, this and that, so he's probably going to say things like ISO. It's the gain. It's the gain. So just remember that. So it amplifies the light in our camera. So the light that the sensor captures, which is what's right behind this lens here, that's the sensor back there. The light that the sensor captures is amplified by that gain. So low gain on the camera is for like natural light sensitivity. It's best for like well-lit scenarios. So like on a Sunday morning, sometimes we don't have to run the gain so high. And again, we're going to learn multiple things. There's a whole triangle here that if we want to accomplish the best settings, we're not just going to take the gain and just run it to the roof. Oh, it's dark in here. Let's run the gain all the way up. We can't operate that way. So we're going to have to learn this triangle and learn how to operate and say, okay, we're going to adjust the gain. It's only going to be within this measure. So if there's another issue, we need to come down here. We need to go over here. So we'll work that. There's really three things, and we're learning them all right now. So your gain, low gain, is for probably a brighter scenario. So if we were outside shooting a film, we're working with lower gain in the morning, in the afternoon. Higher the gain, boost the light, so it's ideal for dim situations. So here in the church at nighttime, you'll notice our gain is going to be set differently than it is on a Sunday morning or like right now. So you're going to have that. So if you're on the switcher and you're communicating with your camera operators, just remember, your gain, turn your gain up. Oh, it's fuzzy now because here's the trade-off. There's a catch. The higher the gain introduces noise or that grainy appearance to your screen. So on your videos, if you turn it, okay, so it's like this. I think this is the best way to do it. Here's my volume switch, right? I love music. We're going to rock that volume to the top. But there's a trade-off. If your speakers don't handle that volume, you're going to get that scratchy, raspy, right. Some of us just go through it. Don't make a difference. We'll change the speakers out when it's done. But when you're talking about the camera, you turn that gain up, you're going to introduce a bunch of noise. It's just going to get ugly. So we'll do that right now. You're probably not seeing it as well because you're sitting there. But if you look right here at the black, all you see is this. You see that noise. So you can see it there, all the way up, all the way down. So you don't just want to rock your gain all the way to the max. So we're working that. Just understand there is a catch to that. Here's the relevance in the church setting. Our church provides diverse lighting situations. I think if you've run the camera at all in the past 3 weeks, you understand that. So for sunlit mornings or dark evenings, our task is to capture every morning at its best light. Knowing how to adjust the gain ensures that we can do just that. So again, there's nothing wrong at practice to just play with it. Just grab that gain, play with it, try to get that understanding. That's what practice is for. So gain is our tool to adjust to different lighting. That could go from these LED lights to a regular light bulb. Once these LED lights turn off, we got regular light bulbs. So when we get in just a minute, start talking about slides. Okay, so we're going to master shuttering speed and aperture right now. So we're going to try to create the perfect shot. So shutter speed and aperture. That's your shutter speed. And your aperture is, do you remember the name for that? Yes, your iris. Some people like myself, I don't even know if this is official. I call it the f-stop. Is that what you call it? You ever called it the f-stop? All right. What about you? Have you ever called it the f-stop, Ethan? Yeah, he calls it the f-stop. It's just the school I came from. You know what I'm saying? We called it the f-stop. Some people call it iris. So you've got, and then it's officially called the aperture. So these are two camera settings that will dramatically influence your video. So these are cool. So we're going to go with the shutter speed first. So shutter speed, we already talked about the sensitivity to light. Shutter speed controls basically how long the sensor is exposed to that light. The only way that I can really think of it is how fast your camera blinks. So your camera, I think I posted this on Facebook the other day. Like, they say that the human eye, if you could measure it out, if it were like this, it would be like 500 and something megapixels. Like our phones and stuff operate, I mean, we're talking about 48, 60. Like that's this large, that's like on my computer, if I had like a 60 megapixel picture, I could zoom all the way into that bad boy, just look crispy and clear. So I mean, I could crop it. Our eyes are like 570 something. I don't remember the number that I read. It was amazing. Was it 600? That's crazy. So I'm like, just imagine zooming in on that picture if we could capture what we're seeing with our eyeballs. That's why when we take those pictures, I think my sister said this, you take those pictures, even looking down to the cliff like this, you take those pictures and you go, man, I wanted to send that to somebody, but that just does not look right. That's because can't nothing match these eyes. But we blink, and your camera blinks. That's the shutter. So when I take that picture, it's that blink. So it's how long was the blink? Did I blink like this? Or did I blink like this? That allows that much light come in. So a faster shutter speed means that the camera sensor is exposed to light very quickly. And it's great for capturing fast-moving scenes, like the kids running around the church on Sunday night. Well, they're running. You got to have something quick that's going to. So this would work more, say, for Kaylee, who's operating the camera. She's going to keep her shutter speed quick, boom, because she's trying to catch somebody jumping, or she's trying to catch a kid running around that corner, whatever. However she's trying to capture that, she's going to have that faster shutter speed. You don't want the motion blur. But the slower shutter speed is the sensor's getting more of that light. It's slower, so it's there for a longer time. So you start to introduce that motion blur, okay? There is times that you want that motion blur. So it could be, if we're trying to convey movement. So let's just pretend like we're in a really rockin' worship service and we're doing whatever. We're getting a little bit creative and we're panning. And right before he switches to another camera, we're like, yo, give me a pan. We may want some of that motion blur to just kind of pull out so it doesn't look like a mistake, but like it's got that motion blur. Well, obviously you're going to get that with that higher shutter speed. So those are things where over time we're going to get creative with our cameras, and our switchers are going to be able to convey that message, and our operators are going to know exactly where to go to create that. So that's the shutter speed. So what is the aperture? Well, the aperture kind of works a little bit around the same, but it dictates how wide the lens opens up. So now we have this center thing in our eyes, basically, whatever that's called. Anybody know what that's called? Our iris? Never mind. It's our iris, ain't it? Okay. Yeah, that little center thing. So that aperture is basically that. And so, is it dilated? Or is it smaller? So we know from when we've got our eyes dilated, you know that dilation, the larger the aperture, the more blurry, right? So it's harder to focus. So that's what dictates there. So that's what our aperture is. So it's like the pupil in our eye. Pupil. That's a word I'm looking for. Yes. Expanding or extracting based on the light. So when you adjust that, remember the triangle I'm talking about here. So we have our gain, or our ISO, but then now we have our shutter speed and we have our aperture. That's how we control that light. That's how we get. So it's not always jack the gain up. Sometimes it's, hey, give me a little bit of gain here, but adjust your speed, your shutter speed to this. Okay, cool. Now I want you to adjust your aperture. Well, let's talk about why we would adjust the aperture. Because a larger aperture, obviously, like we said, lets in a lot of light. So this creates a shallow depth of field. Zoom that lens into Pastor, and I got that 2.8. Pastor's crispy because I've moved my focus, and he's crispy clean. But the wall and everything behind him is blurry. Well, why? Less distractions. Not only does it just look good and cinematic, but why is it? Well, I don't need to see. The whole time I've been talking, who cares about that picture? That's for the next module. That's not what's important. What's important is the person that was talking. Or when I got that person and they're raising their hands and we're coming from behind them and they're crispy clean, but that stage, y'all ever heard the word bokeh? Bokeh is like where you get those circles, those blurry circles. So if there's lights back there, it'll kind of be like a blurry circle, maybe even give it like a halo effect. You'll get that bokeh back here and the blurry, and that's how you get those pictures that are like, oh, they're in some charismatic church somewheres, because you see the blue-colored lights back there, but it's all bokeh'd out and it's all whatever. But at the end of the day, they just got nice cameras, which means they're in a charismatic church, because most apostolic churches, we got nice cameras, but most other churches don't. Let's do this. Smaller aperture. It's a tiny open situation, so it creates a depth of field, so it brings both the foreground and the background into clear focus. So let's talk about church relevance on that part. So within the walls of this church, obviously, as we know, lighting is dynamic. Worship leaders and everybody is bursting into song. They're singing, or even pastors in a solemn moment. So when we're capturing the whole congregation in sharp focus, camera 2, it's a wide shot, right? We want to capture this audience in the smaller aperture allows us to get that wider focus and to capture everybody. We're not focusing on just 2 people sitting here and everything else is blurry. we got that wider focus. So we use the smaller aperture. So, I mean, you can pop all the way up to, I wouldn't suggest this. Who wants it at 22? But that's your, yes, ma'am. So we're going to talk about terminology, but obviously they're adjusting. That's a focus issue. So they're going to adjust the focus. But before we do all that, more than likely, the production manager on the switcher, which is where you were sitting this morning back in that area, is probably going to switch to another camera. So that's where we're working together. And we're understanding that, oh, he's moving. Camera 3 is already following from one angle. He's following from another, and the switcher will switch it over. So, good question. So then we have a speaker who's speaking, pastor, and it's isolated. So I'll tell you where this is really good at. Camera 2, or camera 1, from the side, ministers behind him. More than likely, they're probably a deer in headlights, like sometimes. If it's a focused message, generally they're not, they're sitting there. They might be like this, but their eyes, well, just imagine if I caught one of y'all on camera and posted on social media. Posted on social media, and you'd be like, yo, can you take that picture down? Like, I was literally just like, well, they don't want the same thing, but we want to see pastor. So we're going to pull that aperture to 2.8. The aperture to 2.8 is going to allow me to zoom it, capture pastor, clean, and it's going to make them over there on the side a little bit more blurry than, say, they would be if we just had trash lenses. Oh, I thought you were saying something. Do you have anything, though? You do? Okay, I'm going to come back to you. All right. Let's do this. So adjust the aperture based on the moment. More than likely, if you're over here, you're going to be at 2.8. More than likely, if you're back there, I think the lowest we go is 5.6. I think. Is it? Yeah, it's 5.6 zoomed in, which we're generally zoomed in. But yes, when you come to that medium shot where we're looking through the crowd, yeah, you can get lower, probably like in the 4s on like a half zoom. But yeah, that range is, we need better. Yeah, that range is trash. But this one over here, we keep on 2.8 from the back. Well, that's probably not the best shot. So we need to work on all of these. Just remember, okay, so start with your shutter speed. If you're practicing, start with your shutter speed. Notice, you're going to get the motion blur, or you're going to get that clarity. Next, play with the aperture. So when you're at practice, play with the shutter speed, then play with the aperture. See how you like that blur basically on the back end, where you're at. So remember, shutter speed affects the motion clarity. Aperture controls the depth of field. So I can really feel, like if I was looking at you right now on this camera, and the stage was behind you, and that stage gets a little bit blurry, man, I can feel the length there, versus if I just left the aperture wide open or, small, and it was like an F-22, it looked like somebody took a picture with a trash camera, basically. So there's a science to it. I hope you understand somewhat of the science. You'll have this paper. Eventually, it just becomes second nature. You'll look at that, between the gain, the shutter speed, and the aperture. Yes, sir. Did you say you had something?
Oh, I feel official. To try to simplify, because most of the time we're not really changing environments that much. It's always going to look similar. Anyways, we're shooting in the same building every time with same lights. The one with shutter speed, and I didn't know that y'all ever adjust it, but typically rule of thirds is you're going to shoot, your shutter speed should be double what your frame rate is. So if we're shooting 30, your shutter's supposed to be 60. We shouldn't change it because that gives you you don't, when you say motion blur, you think of that, you naturally think of that as a bad thing, and it's not a bad thing. Your natural eyes see motion blur. You do this, my hand's blurry, right? You know, so shooting double the frame rate is what your eye naturally sees. So I guess I don't know if it's a question. I just didn't know that y'all ever adjusted that, or if I didn't know if there was a reason why you ever adjust that. Not to mention, we're shooting in a fairly low light situation, so obviously the slower your shutter is, the more light we're giving ourselves. But that was just my thing on the shutters. If it was me, I would keep it at 60, and I'd never even touch that. As far as the aperture goes, just another simplified thing. I would keep it as low as or as open as we possibly can, because two reasons. One, the lower that number is, the more light we're giving ourselves. We're in a low light situation, so the better. And for two, more of that bokeh look, which just naturally looks good, and it draws the subject out, like you said. So I think in those cases, with doing your shutter and your aperture that way, we're getting the best look and we're getting the most light that this camera can possibly give us. The less we got to work with that ISO or the gain, because obviously the lower we can keep that, the better quality image we're getting to see. But I think in that case, like if we kind of keep that shutter and that aperture to basically, we're going to shoot as wide open as this lens will let me, and we're going to keep this shutter at double the frame rate, which is fairly low, 60 from 30. At that point, really our only exposure adjustments we should ever really have to make would be with that gain. I think it just simplifies everything. Plus, it's given us the best results that we could ask for anyways. Does that all make, I mean, if you disagree with me, this is your show, so go ahead.
Nope, actually. So last Sunday, I think it was last Sunday, we went down to 29.97. Before that, we were shooting at 50 frames per second. We were at 120 on the shutter. We went down to 29.97, which we went down to 60 on the shutter. So it makes sense. It's exactly what you're saying. So when I said between 120 and 60, he's right. That's a good rule of thumb, actually. I forgot about that one, is double your frames per second. So that's an even, no, I really appreciate you saying that, because it's an even simpler way of thinking about it. Because, again, I was already thinking, camera one, I don't imagine a scenario where you're ever off of 2.8. Right. I can't think of one where you would ever be off of 2.8 in the first place. And if your shutter speed was already set at 60, 2 times your frames per second, then yes, at that point, you're just playing with your ISO or your gain, which is that triangle. At the end of the day, it's just that much simpler for the switcher or the production manager to say, hey, your shot's too. So, yes. No, I actually really appreciate you saying that, because that's a simpler method of us being able to communicate with our team. This one back here, again, everything's the same. Our aperture is wide open right now, which is great. I'm trying to think if there's a scenario we would use it. I think the only time that I would change aperture, if I had to think, and I think our middle camera is going to get a little bit more intense than what we're using it. On Wednesday night, I took the 2.8 lens off and I put the original lens back on it, just so that we could have 3 shots during service, and I operated it from the switcher. Just went up there and made my adjustments, but I was able to zoom in and do whatever. That's not a good lens that we have on that one as far as aperture-wise. The glass on it, nothing about that lens is probably that great. So I think we're either going to use one of our new lenses on that one, or we're probably going to come up with another lens that makes more sense for that setting, because I don't want that camera just to be one wide shot in the back of the church. I think we can, yeah. Well, yes and no. We're going to have that view. We want to have another camera. Yes, sir. But right now we have the roaming camera, so it kind of alleviated our need for that one right this minute. So will it come eventually? Yes. I just can't imagine a scenario where they'd actually pay for it, because with the roaming camera, that'll give us any view that we want. But for right now, we could have a DSLR sitting back there with a, 24 or something, that's just capturing that wide thing. But the way that we have it now, just because like on Wednesday I wanted that third angle, that third shot. That's the only time I can imagine changing an aperture would be for that one because it's different because we're capturing the whole and then we're capturing some. Y'all aren't really capturing the whole of anything. If you're doing anything, you're coming over the shoulder. No. I really appreciate that. I actually simplified everything I was saying even more simple. Um, it is. Yes. Yep. You brought it into bite size. Yep. I appreciate that. Yep. We'll, we will. And honestly, I don't even care if we get laminated cards and on a circle and hang them from the thing. I mean, this kind of information needs to be on these cameras. Yeah, it was great. Thank you. Let's talk about white balance because it was asked about, and this is the last thing that we're talking about on this segment: white balance. Um, we want the camera to look natural. We want what everybody's seeing to look natural. So white balance is where it comes into play. Where I call Kaylee over in the morning and I say, "Hey, Kaylee, look at these three cameras. I can get bright. I can get them set bright all day long. I can look at all three and say, okay, I know exactly where we're at. Okay, this looks good. It's a natural, this and this and this. But my natural is not the same as your natural. So you ever seen maybe one of my shots looked green? Possibly. Well, I didn't see it that way. I'm red, green, and yellow colorblind. That's why I tell them in court at least. That's why, sir, that's why I went through the red light. I didn't see it. But that green doesn't hit me like that. So somebody's like, yo, he looks sick. I don't even know what that means. Like people are asking me, do I look pale? Do I look green? Do I look this? And I've never seen anybody look pale or red or green in my entire life. Like you just look like you. White balance is going to cover this. So white balance ensures that the scene looks natural and that it's true to life as possible. This is why this job is hard for me, because I know what looks true to life to me. You don't want that. It sets the mood. So white balance. Here's what we wanted. I'm going to try to think on his terms here of simplifying here. So we're balancing out the colors. We want the whites to look white. We don't want the whites to be tinted blue, tinted yellow. So we know that that's called, like, you got warm and then you got cold. So we want everything to be natural. I wish that you should just be able to put it at 0. That's my opinion. Like, don't go to negative 50. Don't go to positive 50. Set it at 0. It doesn't work that way in real life. So we talked about a K number here. That's called a Kelvin. So right now it's set at 7,500 Kelvin, okay? So this describes the temperature of the light. Does anybody in here understand Kelvin or know anything about Kelvin? Okay, I know you do. Okay, so basically that light is yellow, and then you have your daytime lights, which are like white. Those are set on, if you look at the back of the box, it's going to tell you the Kelvin rating of that light. So your indoor lighting, like your tungsten bulbs, they're around like 3,200 Kelvin. And then you've got your daytime lights, which are like around like the 5,500 Kelvin. So that 5,500 Kelvin is like white. It's daytime. It's what they, Kelvin, Kelvin, I think. Yeah. Is it a different Kelvin? It's still temperature. No, I think you're right, but I think it's just temperature, isn't it? Yeah, my knowledge of Kelvin ends with photography and videography. Anything outside of that, it's just a temperature scale, so it could be. Could be. But we see that temperature when it comes to lights. So again, in overcast conditions, shade, you can push it to like that 6,500 Kelvin or higher. The tint on the camera, so that's basically blue to yellow. So those lights obviously are probably like 3,200 or something. Like that's that yellow. And then you have like a daylight bulb that you put in there, that's probably like that 5500. When you're taking pictures and you've got those lights that we use when we're taking pictures, we deal with that almost all the time, and that's a difference of opinion. He may pop off and just be like, hey, let's push more towards 5500 because he likes a warmer setting. I like them colder. So therefore, I may be pushing more towards, towards that 5500. It's all at that point again, and that's why this is such an issue with me. I have a passion for photography, a passion for videography, but I have to have an assistant sit beside me because what I see and what I produce to the world is not the same thing that y'all see and what you produce. So here's the relevance of the church. So with the various lighting conditions, from morning sunlight pouring in through through our windows, or at nighttime when obviously everything is a lot more dimly lit because at nighttime we don't have that natural light, and so everything is a lot darker in here. Your Kelvin can be a lot higher in the morning. Or at nighttime, if you want to give that warmer, then your Kelvin's going to be a lot lower. Generally, we run our Kelvin at, 3550? Generally, we've been running around here. That could be, that's a number that can change. It's your white balance. You don't want to say, hey, it's got to be at 3550. And you're like, oh my goodness, it's so yellow. Like, can we? That's how you're adjusting that natural light. Your tint. That's the other number over here. So the negative 50 and the positive 50. So your tint is going to allow you to change on a green to magenta. There's my issue. I got no issues with white and yellow and, well, maybe I got one with yellow, but blue, who knows. But the magenta to the green, they're like, oh, well, he looks so green. Kaylee says that to me all the time. When she comes over in the morning, she's like, no, change camera one. He is green. All right. So I'll say, hey, camera one, and I give you some numbers to adjust it to, and then I go, what does that look like? Is that good? Because I don't know the difference. I ask her until she says it's good. So if I ask one of y'all, it's the same thing. If y'all aren't colorblind, you tell me, hey, no, we're good, then I'm probably going to ask one of y'all. I have those, got them for Christmas, but they're more like sunglasses. Unfortunately, in a darker setting like this, they're dark lenses. You can't find glasses like what we wear that have it in there. Yeah, it changes because it's like a red or something that it throws inside those glasses. But I saw. Yes, ma'am. Mm-mm. So that's your white balance here. Your Kelvin is going to go from yellow to blue. Now, what we're talking about right now is your tint. That is going to be your negative 50 to positive 50. That's going to go from magenta to green. So you'll see when I pop this over right now, I'm at negative 50 right now on him. Am I what? Oh, okay. When I go to positive 50, you saw the difference there? So we're working two different extremes, negative 50, positive 50. So you see the difference. So what we need to do is, if we're before service and we're noticing that people are green or they're red, we got to find that number. That's where I'm not coming to save you. I'm not coming to save you. Garrett or Ethan or somebody will come save you. I can't. I can tell you what numbers to achieve which direction you need to go, but I won't be able to tell you they don't look red or they don't look green. So the church relevance again. So if you ever notice an unexpected green or magenta hue, that's where you want to adjust that tint when you're in service. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think the easiest way, then this is just how I do it. The easiest way to kind of achieve your proper white balance would be most of the time between all the praise singers or worship leader or whatever, somebody's probably going to be wearing a white shirt or something white. Find something white and make it look white on the screen. And if you can do that, then you're probably pretty close to where you need to be. That's just kind of the easiest way to, without making it getting confusing. Because with colored lights and stuff, it's automatically going to make stuff look wrong. Like you standing right there, you look like a Oompa Loompa, like you're completely blue, you know. Or not an Oompa Loompa, they're orange, aren't they? I'm thinking of the girl that ate the blueberries. But like, so, but I'm just saying, like, if I tried to adjust white balance to you standing there, it's not going to be right because you have a blue light on you. So it would be, you know, trying to find that white source and match to the white, balance to the white.
Yeah. And, you know, there's cards and stuff that we can get, you know, that you can stand up there and you can hold these cards and you can balance your stuff off of that. But again, I think it's just simple just to, like he said, somebody's going to be wearing, especially if you're at practice, nobody's wearing a jacket generally, so you can pull that white shirt. Yeah. You shouldn't. Yeah, absolutely. Because unless, like, we had the issues where the lights went out, but unless that happens, nothing changes for the most part there. Does anybody have any questions on those? So we're good on ISO/gain. We're good on the aperture or the iris. We're good on the shutter speed, and we're good on white balancing. If we're good on that, then what time is it? It's 11:30. We're going to end this one, and then when we get back, I'm going to cover best practices, which is going to be shot composition. And let's do this. Let me ask you all a question. Are we good just cutting maybe for 5 minutes and then just jumping right into this thing and just running right through the composition part? All right, let's do that. Let's just take 5 minutes. If you need to use the restroom, get a drink, do whatever, and then we'll come back. It is, come on, Tony, what time is it? It's 11:31, so let's do 11:30, 11:40.